everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel. So in today's video it's going to be a June reading wrap up, or what I read in June with my reviews and ratings. I know this video is a little bit late, but as you can see by the new backdrop, I have moved house. So the last 2 to 3 weeks I have been pretty busy packing, moving, having family visit, etc. So I haven't gotten around to film this video yet, but here we are. So altogether, I read 10 books in June, which is a pretty average to good reading month for me. So that's pretty average. Last month in May, I read 20 books, and that was completely unheard of for me before. So this is probably more what you could expect from my monthly reading wrap-ups. I read 8 hardcover books and 2 books on my Kindle this month. So I'll start with my Kindle reads and we'll go from there. So the 2 books I read on my Kindle were Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney and By a Thread by Lucy Score. So I will start off with Sometimes I Lie. Sometimes I Lie by Alice Feeney. This book is a thriller novel, and it follows the story of, I can honestly never remember any characters' names, but it follows the story of this lady who is in a coma, and she can hear everything that is being said, but no one else knows that she can hear. So pretty much she's in a coma and she's hearing what everyone else is saying around her, and she's lost her memory of this traumatic event that's happened. So she is lying there pretty much trying to remember what has happened to her and why she's in the coma. And it follows a crazy story about her husband, her sister, her sister's husband, her nephews, her childhood, and it was actually a pretty crazy story. Straight after I read it, I rated the story 3.75, I think, but looking back on it, it was really crazy and there were so many plot twists. It was pretty scary in some sections and just so much going on, and it was very, very good. So I actually want to bump up my rating to probably 4.5 or 4.25. I'll stick with 4.25 since I rated it lower after I read it. But yes, that's Sometimes I Lie. I definitely recommend this one because when I started reading it, I expected it to be like, oh, you know, this woman is in a coma, her husband did something to her because he doesn't love her anymore. Maybe the husband is covering up something, hoping she dies or doesn't remember. But honestly, it gets so crazy, and that is not at all what happens. So highly recommend that book, 4.25 stars. The other book I read on my Kindle was By a Thread by Lucy Score. This is a grumpy boss trope and a workplace romance. It starts out with the main character, which I cannot remember the name again. How do I not remember the names? Seriously. Anyway, it doesn't matter. The main girl character works in a pizza shop, and then this guy comes in and gets her fired, and that's where the story starts. They end up working together in the guy's company. She works for him. She's doing like these house renovations, so there's different places where they meet up and get to know each other. I really enjoyed the banter. They also had like a really fun vibe. It felt really young and fresh. The main guy character, I felt like his character was really well developed in the story, which sometimes doesn't really happen in romance novels. I feel like the main guy character is just like, oh, he's really hot, oh, he's rich, sweet, full stop. But the guy in this book was really well developed, and yeah. I did go into this book with really high expectations because a lot of the booktube girlies that I watch gave this book 5 out of 5, like one of their favorite romance books ever, and it was really good, but I only gave it a 3.75, I think. One thing I didn't like about By a Thread was that it was pretty sexual. Like if you are wanting YA or not wanting a lot of spice, then it's probably not the book for you, because just like the innuendos and goes into a bit of detail. It was a bit graphic, like I skipped a little bit, but it was also hard to skip because it wasn't like a graphic sex scene that you could just skip over and then start again. It was sort of embedded in the storyline, if that makes sense. Anyways, there's a lot of spice / innuendo / sexual themes throughout that book, so just be aware of that if you do not like that in novels. Now that I'm thinking about it, I feel like I might have been in a little bit of a reading slump this month because I rated a lot of the books pretty low. Yeah, I think I've just come out of a reading slump. Because looking back on the 2 books I read on my Kindle, Sometimes I Lie and By a Thread, they were really good books, but at the time I didn't rate them higher than in the 3s. And I think if I read them at a different time, I probably would have rated them like mid-4s because they're really good books. But anyway, I highly recommend both of those books. There's nothing in them that made me feel like they were bad. I think I might have just been in a bit of a slump. Now, at the start of the month, I finished off the Shatter Me series, which honestly feels like so long ago. I can hardly even remember reading these books now, and it was only a month ago. But I read the last novella in this one, which is Reveal Me. Then I read Defy Me, Imagine Me, and these are the last 4 novellas in the Shatter Me series, which the rest is over here. Did I just say last 4 novellas? 2 novellas, 2 full books. These ones keep the story going, obviously, and follow the characters through the war against the re-establishment, where they are trying to overtake it and start a new world outside of them. So this one is just a short novella. This one, it sets up the last full novel by going into detail about the war and what led the world to this point, and there's a lot of like plot twists and extra information in that book. Then the last full book of the series is very intense. It might have been my favorite book of the whole series, but it follows the storyline of all the characters who are hiding out in this extra place that's hidden from the government, and I don't know how to explain this, but this book is very political, very war based. So it follows all the characters as they overtake the government, pretty much. I'll leave it there so I don't spoil too much. And then the last book, Believe Me, it is the last novella of the series. It's pretty much just an extended epilogue, and it follows the 2 main characters, Juliet and Warner, as they get married. So very cute, and really recommend the series. I loved the series, and it's YA, so it doesn't have a lot of spice or anything in it. Highly recommend. I'm just gonna pop them back in their place. Oh, also, I forgot to rate those. So the last novella, I rated 3.5, which is pretty good for a novella for me because they add context, add character perspective, but they don't really add to the storyline. So 3.5. This one I rated 4. Imagine Me, I rated 4.75, and then the Believe Me, I rated 4.75 as well. So yes, now we only have 4 more books left to read this year. The first one is Happenstance by Tessa Bailey. Now I have to be honest, I only bought this book because I thought it was a cute cover and because I've heard people really like Tessa Bailey novels. So mistake there. I should have read even just the blurb or the synopsis of the book, and I probably would have realized I hated it because it is a romance novel. Elise, I remember her name because it's written on the back, about Elise who goes to this island and she gets trapped on this Skyrail tram with 3 other boys or men or whatever, 3 other guys, and they start a relationship, all 4 of them, and it is pretty much only sex based. There's about 10 million sex scenes in here, and it's happening where these 3 boys, and it's fully insta love. These 3 guys just are obsessed with the main girl that they saw one time on the tram, and they're pretty much like puppies running after her, trying to find her. They meet her at her work, Then they do some stuff in the back room. Yeah, if you can gather by my tone of voice, I hated this book. I'm not really into multiple people relationships, and I'm not that worried about a lust sexual book. I'm more into like a drawn out romance novel where it's like super sweet, super cute, and pretty much the opposite of this book. And I really don't like the set out of this book. It's like a large book. It's very thin, and it sort of feels like you're reading a textbook. Like the pages are really thick and like shiny almost. I don't know how to explain it, but I really hated this book in every regard possible. So 1 star. And it makes me really nervous because one of the reasons I got it was because of Tessa Bailey, and I know that a lot of people love her writing. So I was like, sweet, I'm sure it'd be good. Romance, love it, the cover's cute, let's get it. I have multiple other Tessa Bailey books on my TBR to read, and now I'm really nervous to go into those books. But we'll see what they're like. But yeah, 1 star, hated that book, do not recommend. The next book I read was Tomorrow, Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I had really high expectations going into this book, but I think because I just finished off a huge series and I'd binged all through the whole series, and then I read a book that I really hated, I think it put me in a bit of a slump, as I said earlier. So this book, I rated it a 4 stars at first, but I'd probably give it 3.75 to 4, somewhere around there, because it just didn't really stand out to me. That's Hazel. She should not be awake yet. I'll be back. Okay, I am back. She is back asleep. So, I forget where I was up to, but I was talking about this book, so yeah. So this is Tomorrow, Tomorrow, Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I think that's how you say her name. Anyways, I had really high expectations going into this book because it was like top rated book on Goodreads for last year. Multiple of the booktube people that I watch love this book and gave it 5 stars. So I was like, let's give it a go. Anyways, so I read this book having these high expectations and it didn't quite meet them, but I still really like the book and I would probably rate it a 4 stars at the end of the day. So that is a really good book and I highly recommend reading it. Just go into it with an open mind, see what you think. It follows Sam and Sadie, the 2 main characters, as they meet when they're kids. So it follows them through their life together and apart, how they sort of are friends, they fall apart, then they reconnect, and then they fall apart, and then they reconnect. So it's a really interesting book about relationships, both friendships, sibling dynamics, romantic relationships, friendships, all of those different types of relationships. It's very interesting. It has some really cool like quotes and stories. I'm not really sure how to explain the book because it's not like my typical book that I would read, but Sam and Sadie, the 2 main characters, are video game developers, so it follows them through their professional working lives and them creating games and creating a company and then having children, etc, and it's very interesting. I did find that I did a lot of highlighting and circling and underlining on pretty much every page. So there was a lot of interesting things about this book and I feel like I will reread it one day and see what I think about it then, because if I was in a book slump then it probably just wasn't it for me at this point in time. But when I say it wasn't it for me, I gave it 4 stars, so I still really liked it, but I just expected it to be like creme de la creme of a book because of the reviews I'd previously heard. But yeah, so that's that book. And the last 2 books that I read for the month was these 2, The Cruel Prince and The Wicked King. So these are the first 2 books in the Folk of the Air trilogy by Holly Black. This is the first book of the trilogy. It's sort of like a setup book, world building book. You get to meet all the characters that are important and you get an insight into the main character especially and her personality and what's going to happen in the next couple books. This is a YA fantasy trilogy, and it is very politics based. Pretty much that's what the whole book trilogy is politics, world building, war, with the tiniest sprinkle of romance. But honestly, I loved it, and I gave the whole series altogether a 5 stars. Oh, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, it might be 4.5 stars, because I'm just comparing it to ACOTAR, and that's a 5-star series for me, and this did not come anywhere close to that, but I still really loved it. I'm gonna say 4.5 star series. And I did finish the last book, but that'll be in my July reading wrap up, so that's a spoiler for you. But anyways, it's a trilogy, and there also is a novella that follows the main guy character's story. I didn't read that one. I wasn't really interested, so I was like, I read the main 3 books and I'm done. That's enough for me. But yes, I highly recommend this series if you're into YA fantasy, YA novels, fantasy novels with some romance, but you're not relying on that to get through the book, that are heavily politics and war based and world building. I will say the first novel was slightly complicated to get my head around starting off, like getting into the world, because it doesn't fully explain all the creatures or anything. It's almost as if every different fairy / creature had their own look and power. Like some people were green, some people had tails, some people had pointy ears, some people didn't. So it was like, all right, I'm not really sure what to picture right now. But when you sort of just don't worry about that and just lose yourself in the story, then it's great. So I highly recommend this series. I was a bit trepidatious going into it because I'd heard very mixed reviews, but if you go into it expecting it to be very politics based, very YA fantasy, like world building, war, fairyland sort of a thing, then I think you will really like it. So give those a go and hopefully you enjoy them. This is my June reading wrap up. Those are all the books I read in June. I think I got through a little bit of a reading slump, but I'm happy with my reading month. There were some books that I really liked, some books I really hated, and some just mid. So overall, can't complain. I read 10 books, which is amazing for me. And yeah, so I hope to see you in my next video. Hope you enjoyed this one, and catch you later.